It's 4 o'clock in Los Angeles. It's 6 o'clock in Chicago. And it's 7 p.m. in New York City. Hello, everybody. Welcome to What's the Buzz, America's Popcast. I'm Mad Dog DeCipio, joined as I am each and every week. God help me. I am Amelia the Pitbull Chapman. And tonight, the Kennedy conspiracy is their merit. To walk us through this quagmire of muck and mire is my friend Dan, the man Lazada. Dan, how the hell are you, brother?
I'm good, Angelo. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm better that you're here because, I needed some inquiring minds around here, and Amelia's on the fritz. We may have to put her out the pasture tonight, Dan. We have a gentleman that's going to be joining. He was supposed to be here tonight. Let me just explain to everybody. We have a gentleman going to be with us tomorrow and Wednesday named Skip G, and that's all I can tell you about his name. He has information, photos, video, most never seen by the public. Where he gets them, I cannot tell you. It would get me in a lot of trouble if I did, so I can't say anything about it. But Skip G will be here tomorrow and Wednesday to talk about what you don't know about the Kennedy assassination, and there is much that people don't know. But the question, Dan Lazada, the question of the night is the Kennedy conspiracy. Is there merit? Can we comfortably say, Dan, and by the way, it's nice to see your happy face again.
Well, good to see you. Well,
Thank you. Thank you. Can we say with any certainty, because we've speculated and, conspired for years that there was a conspiracy in the assassination of John Kennedy. Can we, with some comfort level, say there was?
well, there certainly is a lot of evidence out there that raises questions as to what really happened in Dallas that day. I mean, I think, given the instant moment, the situation that happened with Donald Trump, and the speculation that began immediately as to whether or not this was an inside job, an outside job, the work of a conspirator, conspiracies, whatever. And so when an event like that happens, I think naturally people ask questions and they want to know. And whenever there's limited information and the authority that existed at the time, at whatever level, was in control of the flow of information, people started to speculate in the beginning. But over the many years that have passed since then, I think we've gradually seen more and more evidence that gives us a reasonable comfort at suggesting that there is far more to this than one man with one gun in a window in the book depository.
And one bullet that did all of that damage. Are you kidding me? Wow. Arlen Specter had one hell of an imagination, God rest his soul. And he was a senator. He was the senator who proposed the single bullet, the magic bullet. Dan, remember that? They called it the magic bullet theory.
I remember. Yeah.
Well, what's easier to believe? That a couple of people conspired to take down the leader of the free world, or that this one bullet killed the president, damaged Governor Connolly, went up around inside, did a triple gainer loop, went through the president, landed on the floor, and somehow made its way to the gurney, the hospital gurney, where it was discovered by a janitor.
And didn't have a mark on it, right?
Not a fucking scratch, Dan. Not a fucking scratch.
That seems odd. You know, as you and I have talked before, I started in investigative reporting by being a police reporter many years ago. And one of the things I learned immediately was that you got to gather information yourself to know whether or not you can trust it, and you've got to be able to find some fair balance between what you know and what you don't know.
Yeah.
So I do think we know a lot more than we knew at various times when, say, for instance, the movie JFK was made, or or
Oh,
things of that nature. We know a lot more now, and we've seen so
yeah,
many different theories.
yeah,
Um, but I think history tells us a lot, and that's one thing that I'm reminded of is that people in places in power, people who had the ability to shape perspectives, shape ideas on what the public heard
mhm,
about the information that existed. I think those things are also clues as to what
yeah.
we should think about.
I could not have said that any better myself. I'm glad I didn't because I would have screwed it up. Um, I will tell you that what you said right at the start there set the tone for probably what will be the rest of the show. In that, in the early '60s, there was this age of innocence. It was Camelot. The good-looking president, his beautiful wife. By the way, what they showed America was not how it really was. They couldn't stand each other. They both drank like fishes. Um, the president drank a lot and took a lot of meds because he had a seriously messed up back. Jackie was having affairs. The president was having affairs. What they showed America was this almost almost as pristine as that pristine bullet, Dan. There wasn't a mark on them,
And
at least not. And I think that's the metaphor for the JFK assassination. Everything that glitters is not gold,
Right.
particularly in Camelot. Let's talk about what people were willing to believe back then, Dan. We live in a time now where people are so jaded, everything's a conspiracy. Back in the day, they worked extraordinarily hard and took painstaking efforts to quelch any question of conspiracy. Now it's in your face. Now it's we did this. What are you going to do about it? It just shows you how far we've come. In some way, you have to respect their honesty. You know, they're crooked as the day is long, but at least they're being honest that they're crooked as the day is long.
they're talking about it. They're more out in the open, right? Well,
That's the point. Yes, and
Mhm.
that's going to be tonight's. I get as I said, it's going to set the tone for the rest of the night. Um, Dan, how old were you when the president was killed?
let's
Young
see.
man, college maybe.
I was a sophomore in high school, and
Okay, sophomore in high school. All
and
right.
I remember, like most people, I remember where I was and what I was doing. I was sitting in my 10th grade math class, and the math teacher went out to the hallway in this very large integrated school in my hometown, which was newly integrated and had had lots of problems.
Yeah.
But the math teacher came back and announced that Kennedy had been shot, and school was
Mm.
out. I
Yeah.
went home and stayed watching with my family the television for the next 2.5 days.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
What was the general reaction, Dan, amongst your high school peers at the time? Was it was it completely unexpected? Did it take everyone by surprise?
I
Or
think
were there as there are now, were there pockets of people who said, I knew that was going to happen?
Well, in my neighborhood on the north side of Muncie, Indiana, people were digging fallout shelters in their backyard, and there were a good number
Mhm.
of them. I'd say maybe a half a dozen or 10 within
Wow.
the neighborhood, and so I was a Cold War kid, and as the song goes, and I was under the desk during the air raid drills, and so there was a sense, I think, at the time that it was totally unexpected, but also it brought with us a lot of trepidation, a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of fear of what was going to happen. There was a lot of anxiety about it, in
Mhm.
addition to the emotion that went with, watching all of the events unfold on television.
You're a pretty keen observer, Dan. One thing I noticed about you on the last show, you notice everything. You take mental note of everything around you, your surroundings, and I admire. That's one of the things I do, and I think that's why we are, twin brothers of different mothers. When the assassination took place, did you notice the coverage of the news at the time? What were they willing to say? What were they not willing to say? In fact, what did they go to great lengths to kind of quelch before it became a thing?
I think at the time that there was sufficient competition. You got to remember there were dozens of newspapers then, and there were bureaus, Associated Press, UPI, Reuters. Everybody was covering Dallas that day when Kennedy was visiting, and given the political climate that existed then, there were advertisements that ran that very day expressing hate toward Kennedy, and there was a real mixed atmosphere. I think that the media still, though, was trying to compete for the most information soonest. Yeah. And in 1963, we still had black and white television. A Zenith that flipped from one of four channels that you could pick up, and
four channels. Imagine that, folks. Four channels.
Four channels.
So we would go back and forth between NBC and CBS, and basically, I think we were getting as much information as reporters were able to get. The competition existed, but I think later on, as the dust began to settle, if you were to describe it that way, the manipulation of information began, and the whole idea at the time, I think, of looking back to see who was controlling what and what the historical events of the prior 3 years had shown. I think there would have been more suspicion early on. Of course, everybody jumped to the immediate conclusion and fear that this was done by the Russians, that in the wake of the Bay of Pigs and in the wake of the missile crisis in Cuba, that this was the result of the Cold War turning hot.
Well, you opened up the door. Let me walk in. We have to remember, historically at the time, Russia and Cuba aligned themselves. Well, actually, I should say Cuba aligned itself with Russia at the time. Mm-hmm. Fidel Castro certainly considered himself a Marxist. He was every bit the friend to what was his name? Not Brezhnev. Not Brezhnev. No. What was his name? The Russian guy.
Khrushchev.
I remember because he banged his shoe at the United Nations. Yes.
That's right.
That's the guy, Khrushchev.
Right.
So at the time, you have this superpower of sorts and this kind of like peon in the middle of the Atlantic, making deals with each other. And, Cuba had stuff that Russia wanted, and Russia had stuff that Cuba wanted. Largely what Russia wanted, and I think we know this now, they wanted a little bit of land for their missiles close to Florida so they could strike, and they wouldn't have to worry about, what they hit, because they were going to hit something no matter what they fired. That was the plan, as it were. And then things took a deadly turn. So, and then there's the whole Bay of Pigs debacle. We could do 5 nights on that, just the Bay of Pigs. That was a mess. And how that played into the assassination of Kennedy, we're going to talk about that as well before the week is over. Dan, what really, let's be honest about it, what really did Russia have to gain by taking out Kennedy if they were even in the mix, which I personally don't think they ever were?
I don't think, uh, and of course, this is all just my speculation because I haven't schooled myself well enough on the Russian relations. I've paid more attention to what happened in the U.S., but my understanding is that there was a tremendous gap between what Russia was able to do actually
Yeah.
as far as nuclear weapons and the tremendous uh, excess of nuclear weapons the U.S. had pointed at them from
Yeah.
Turkey to throughout Europe, and so I think that the Bay of Pigs, after Castro stuck his thumb in the eye of not only the American government but in the eye of America's organized crime network and banished the
Yeah.
gangland guys back to Chicago and New York. The Bay of Pigs was a threatened invasion, quickly put down. History has suggested that Kennedy's failure to bring air support made the difference, but the mission was pretty screwed up from day one, and the
Yeah.
intelligence and the intelligence community that was promoting it was
Yeah.
really not too secretive about what it was up to.
Oh, no, not at all. Not
Yeah.
at all. It's interesting, Dan. You mentioned New York and Chicago.
Oh yeah.
Few people realize, Dan Lazater, Pulitzer Prize winning author, Dan Lazater, few people realize at the time, less than a month before Dallas, a plot to kill President Kennedy was uncovered in Chicago. Funny thing, though, Dan, some of the same names popped up in Dallas that they did in Chicago a month earlier. Sam Giancana, Carlos Marsalis, Lee Harvey Oswald,
Jack Ruby.
Johnny Roselli, Jack Ruby, um, uh, uh, Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah.
You're gonna believe it. Laugh when I tell you this. I almost said Edgar Winter now.
Well,
J.
I
Edgar Hoover.
yeah.
But
You know,
so here's the point I'm trying to make to people listening is because they'll probably think I'm making this shit up. Because they do. When I open my mouth, they think it's bullshit.
That's why I
That's
come
why
in.
I have credible people like you to back me up here. Why are
well,
you laughing at?
well, I can tell you an interesting story that relates to this because as I've
I
mentioned,
want you to, because your story, I have this funny feeling that it's going to completely validate me in every way. So go for it.
well, so many years ago, I met a man who he owned a farm in northern Indiana, and he and I got acquainted over a number of years, and he turned out to be Jimmy Hoffa's liaison to the Chicago mob, and he became a something of a mentor of mine, and he was also a rare book collector, and he was well known for his ability to value rare texts. But he was also one of the principals who worked with Tony Accardo, Sam Giancana, and others. He was a member of the 42s, as they used to be called.
Mm-hmm.
So one night, he and I and one of his main people and the nephew of Jake Guzik, who was billed in history as Al Capone's accountant. We all sat down to a dinner at a little country club in Hillsdale, and we were talking and having a pleasant conversation when somehow Robert Kennedy's name came up. And
Oh boy.
all three of these guys began to gripe and yell and spit in their food, and they were pissed off because they hated Kennedy so much.
Brother, that seems to be the way that it was. John and Bobby were detested, despised. Tell us.
There was good reason in their
Oh,
mind.
I know, but I want you to tell them because they're going to think I'm bullshitting.
Well, part of the reason was that going back in history some time ago, Kennedy's father who was running rum back and forth from the U.S. to Canada during Prohibition.
Yep.
He got in trouble with the New York families, and he came to Chicago for help,
Yep.
and they helped him. And that was within the lexicon of the mob's own history. That was a powerful thing. And
Yeah,
then
boy.
when his son Jack was running for president, they helped deliver Cook County. They helped deliver the vote in Cook County and helped get him elected. And so the first thing he did after he was elected was appoint his brother, Bobby Kennedy, Attorney General, and then Kennedy turned around and went after Hoffa. And it was a tremendous sin that they could not forgive.
It was a slap. It was a slap in the face heard around the world.
It was because they delivered for them, and then they turned on them. And so there was a lot of anger.
Explain to everybody, Dan, the significance of Cook County. You and I both know what it means to Chicago, what it means to Cicero, Illinois, what it means to Cicero, by the way, is what they call Little Chicago, because there's as much mob activity in Cicero as there is in Chicago. And in fact, it might be even a little bit more. But at the time, Dan, Cook County was this stranglehold, this Democratic stranglehold owned by the bosses. Not only the mob bosses, but the Democratic bosses.
And the corporate bosses.
Yeah, well. And Chicago has something that's unique among cities. They're called aldermans. And if you don't know what an alderman is, it's kind of like a neighborhood go-between. Would that be a fair way to say it?
Yeah.
You tell me, I'll tell them, and we'll see what we can work out.
Like your precinct committeeman.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. In Philadelphia, we call them the police. Amelia.
Yes.
Questions for Pulitzer Prize winner Dan Lazater.
Yeah, I mean,
triumphant return to our show.
I guess welcome back. What got me was that they try to gather as many people or everyone that they could to tell the same story of what happened. I know there had to have been one or two people that they didn't get a hold of. There had to have been.
Yeah. Well, and so the Warren Commission was formed in the wake of the assassination, and the Warren Commission was staffed, ironically, by someone that Kennedy had fired over the Bay of Pigs. That was Allen Dulles. And Allen Dulles was head of the CIA. And so you look back in history and you confront the fact that, well, here's something interesting. Kennedy said that he was going to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces. And he fired Dulles and Dulles was, like J. Edgar Hoover, was extremely powerful within the administrative circles. So Dulles winds up on the Warren Commission. But if you look a little farther, there's somebody else who's on the Warren Commission who seems like perhaps a natural pick, but that was John McCloy. And John McCloy was, as I've noted before, was the New York Times dubbed in his obituary, the chairman of the establishment. He was a former assistant secretary of war under Roosevelt. He remained under Truman. He became the governor for the occupation of Germany. He was one of the individuals who helped form and craft the CIA from the OSS and helped dictate the kinds of approaches it would take to matters of national interest, I guess you could say, and national security in their zeal for communism. So there was, interestingly enough, even though the Warren Commission interviewed all kinds of people and asked them all kinds of questions, they were centered primarily on the idea of proving that it was one man who acted alone. And despite all the stories about Lee Harvey Oswald and where he had been and what he was involved with, at the time, I'm sure nobody was taking a hard look at his history and traveling to Russia and back, his being involved with the U2 project at one point, those kinds of things, and his links to intelligence were not thoroughly examined until these conspiracy theorists arose later on. But by then, the Warren Commission had fairly well established the record. And whether or not that record was adequate to explain what happened has been a question ever since they dotted the last I.
Yes.
Oh my God, please. Oh,
So one other thing that history doesn't step out and record, and this is talked about in the book I finished recently, The Manchurian Journalist, that a man named Robert Story, who was a member of the American legal community, who had very prominent and powerful positions within the executive branch of the federal government. He was head of the Board of Foreign Scholarships for the State Department. He was head of the American Bar Association, and he was one of the principals of Republic National Bank in Dallas. And he had been the chief executive trial prosecutor in the Nuremberg war trials. And it was he who kept the state of Texas from conducting a separate murder investigation into Kennedy, separate from the Warren Commission. And that was the level of his influence. And his influence extended far beyond that. He was part of the CIA's effort to propagandize America by helping control the media, including the cultural media. So between he and John McCloy and people like that, who are staffing the record of history with their own perspectives, I think it once again gives us ample room to begin to consider other alternative explanations.
Dan, I was approached a couple of years back by some surreptitious individuals who saw a video that I posted on YouTube called "The Speech That Killed Kennedy." You know what speech I'm talking about? It's that one that he gave about the free press and opposing tyranny at every cost, and it's the gist of it. How important a speech was that in retrospect, and did it? I'm gonna be careful how I say this. Did it usher in a set of did it usher in a template for the assassination? Was that kind of like, okay, we got something now we could work with, and then work down from there or work up, however you want to categorize that? But the speech, if you listen to it, talks about a president that is pro press, pro free speech, anti establishment, as it were, in some regard, although he was very much a part of the establishment. And it talks about, he talks in the speech about having the press fall under military control. And he mentions that. I don't know how I want to word this other than could someone have taken that as a challenge? Like, come on.
Well, I would say that not just the speech, but other actions that he was taking and other efforts he was engaged in, trying to create dialogue with communist countries so as to reach to step back somewhere from the brinksmanship that had existed since the occupation of Germany. I think he was changing things. I think he wanted to change things, and one of the things that he wanted to change was the CIA, and that was a stronghold for various interests that went far beyond the agency itself. And as I mentioned, John McCloy, he was chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank. He was chairman of the World Bank. He was head of the Rockefeller Foundation and the head of the Ford Foundation. He was influential at the highest levels of our social, cultural and governmental lives, but
Mm-hmm.
didn't play in prominent public view. He was
Yeah.
there. People knew about him. He's recorded in history. I went through his entire archives at Amherst over a period of a couple of weeks
Yeah.
at one point. But we don't see that sort of influence. And one thing that the CIA became is an arm, a military arm, really,
Oh
for
boy. Yeah.
Hmm.
that sort of a.
Sure did.
And so we look back at what the CIA did under Eisenhower in
Mhm.
the 50s, engaging in creating revolutions and undermining democratically elected governments
Yeah.
elsewhere in the world. And we see the damage that has done and the ripples of all that. I think Kennedy wanted to put a stop to that. And
Mm.
so when he challenged that establishment beyond the agency itself, I think he stepped into a dangerous arena.
You said something that is a hair trigger for me. I think one of the unsung heroes of America, past, present, or future, is Dwight Eisenhower. Because here's a military guy warning us in no uncertain terms, warning the American people not to fall prey to the military industrial complex.
Exactly.
It's how he's exactly what he said.
Right.
Now, either he is the greatest prophet America has ever known, or he knew something then that was about to happen that we are still dealing with now today.
Right.
Talk to me about why and how Eisenhower can get away with that. And Kennedy had this giant bullseye on his back. First of all, I will tell you, as just a side note, to me, John F. Kennedy and his brother Bobby, rest in peace, but they were hypocrites of the foremost category, in that he talked of family but cheated on his wife many times. He talked about living the American dream while he was getting richer and people were getting poorer at the same time. Let us not forget, African Americans at the time, and people of Spanish, or Hispanic descent, who were migrating in big numbers from Cuba, from South Florida into the mainstream
Mhm.
of America. They were barely at poverty level. Most of these people, the vast majority of them were barely above poverty level. While Bobby and John were, cavorting, having threesomes with Marilyn, and I showed some of that stuff on my show.
You did.
I got some stuff that can't tell you how I got it, but I showed it.
Yes.
And I got some phone calls after that, brother. Let me tell you something. I got some phone calls. Boy, did I get some phone calls. Amelia,
No,
please
he's
don't
telling the
mind.
truth. We got and emails too out the you know what. I mean, oh my goodness.
Brother, let me tell you what. John Kennedy and his brother Bobby could not holster their weapons there. Well, just
Yeah.
put it
Yeah,
that
they
way.
couldn't.
Got to keep it clean tonight. Um,
Well, keep in mind that the Washington Press Corps didn't delve into those personal lives. Reporters knew about those sorts of things, but
yeah.
it was considered untoward to bring them up. And how do you
Thank
prove
No,
them?
yeah.
And then also there are friends in the press to be careful about. So
Mm.
a lot of that didn't get reported at the time. It would get reported now. Certainly.
Oh yeah.
The other question I have for you, and this seems like on the surface, Dan, it seems like a no brainer. Okay. The South hated Kennedy. Texas, in particular, hated Kennedy. Three things happened within 24 hours of the assassination. The motorcade route was changed. It was called for the limo to be topless instead
Right.
of having the cap on the limo. And the third thing was, instead of riding through the city with Dealey over here and the other, whatever that section was, Pinecrest on this side, instead of riding down the center, which was called, I think, Pine Street, they rode Elm all the way down, which curved, damn near curved right into the grassy knoll. If you've ever been to Dallas, you know what I'm talking about. It's very, very close.
I've driven that route specifically to take a look at that, and as a matter of fact, there's a slope that goes downhill from the Texas Book Depository building. Which anyone,
am I lying?
I grew up in Indiana. I went deer hunting when I was a kid.
Right.
My grandfather took me out to shoot rabbits. I know that it's not easy to follow and make a shot, like Lee Harvey Oswald was alleged to have made.
Wait a minute.
So
we're going to talk about that right now, brother. But first, I got to do a word for my sponsor. Folks, I hope you don't have a weak stomach, because this is our friends at Manscaped. They've been with me for 6 years, and I got it. I'm loyal to my sponsors. We'll be right back.
Do you have sweaty balls or volleyball netty balls? It's time to make them ready balls. The Manscaped.com Lawnmower 3.0 will do the job and clean your knob with its patented no-nick head, so your head will function as desired. Enter promo code Wrestling Future for a generous 20% discount. That's enter Wrestling Future for a 20% discount. Manscaped.com and Wrestling with the Future, going balls to the walls with Manscaped.com. And the Lawnmower 3.0, your balls will thank you. And so will we.
We are back. We have an interesting question, Dan.
Right.
I want to bring this to your attention. Have you seen the declassified document of C.W. Bauman telling Roscoe White Sr. to pose as the Dallas police officer and eyes and ears and mouth, apparently for the first time in American history, that in that declassified document, apparently JFK was a national security threat and world security threat? I have heard that. One of the things that are, thank you, by the way, Willard, thank you for that comment. I've heard this. I showed a photo, Dan, on the show of the so-called badge man. You're familiar with that? I possess, singularly, I possess the most pristine, clear copy of that image that exists anywhere.
Yes.
In fact, to the point where I copyrighted it. Nobody can have it but me. And I used it on our show. You can see his brown hairline. You can see his silver glasses. Wire rim glasses, by the way, too. Interesting for the time, because only the military were wearing them at the time. You can see his Dallas police badge and shoulder patch. You can also see the scope on his rifle, a high velocity rifle. I want to show you something, and so you'll have some indication of what a Carcano rifle is, because I just happen to own one. I'm going to show you.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Talk to Dan.
Of course. Yes, and also with the as far as like the assassination and everything, I know that a lot of people were speculating that it was Lee Harvey Oswald, that there could have been a second gunman right behind him, right, or to the left.
And I think that theory and that idea continued to grow over time and was added to. But I do think, there were even audio recordings that showed too many gunshots for the.
Yeah, we heard that. We
Yeah.
had actually a video
I'm
like
gonna
that.
show you guys something. Take a look at this.
Oh my goodness.
Hold on a second. That's a Carcano. That's a Carcano minus the scope. Watch this. 1, 2, 3. He's supposed to have gotten 3 to 4 shots off in like 4 seconds.
Right.
That took me about 10 seconds just to do that.
I was gonna say that did take you a while.
Okay. Because it's not, they're not exactly, I want you to see something.
Mhm.
It's not smooth at all. It's a little clumsy.
It looked like you had to put some force in that.
In fact, Dr. Cyril Wett said in Italy they call the Carcano rifle a weapon of love, not war.
Mm.
Because you can't kill nobody with it. Look,
Wow.
that's it.
Oh yeah, the barrel.
That's it.
Yep.
What are you hurting with that? You're lucky if you kill a rabbit with that thing.
Yeah. You'd
No?
have to be a pretty good shot to hit a rabbit.
No shit. The point I'm trying to, and you're making the point for me, which is the point. Stay up against that wall, boy. Okay. The point I'm trying to make is it's a clumsy weapon. It's not. It doesn't have. It's got a very small spiral.
Mhm.
If you know anything about that, when a bullet comes out of a gun or a rifle or any projectile, it spirals as it goes. It doesn't never shoots straight out. It spins like this
Mm.
as it comes out the weapon. And that's important. Why? Because it leaves marks on the bullet. The weapon found at the hospital on the gurney had no mark. It had no tool mark on it. A tool mark is what's inside the barrel of a rifle or a gun. It leaves a particular, in other words, it's like that gun's fingerprint.
Right.
The rifle.
Okay.
Right.
So tell me how that thing hurt anybody. And you're looking, I'll show you again. That's a Carcano rifle. Right? That's a Carcano. Who's getting hurt by this fucking thing?
It's one of a long list of things that, as we used to say in the investigative office, it doesn't add up to that story.
No.
So, but the question really, I think, for me is, what is the story, and what were the circumstances? And even though there was Rob Reiner's podcast not too long ago in which they sought to name the names of individuals who might have been involved in a team of assassins used to kill Kennedy. Even if they were to name those individuals and there is no prosecution to be had, there's no fact finding by a court of law, there's no way for us to demonstrate whether or not that is ever true. And so the story remains subject to the preponderance of evidence.
The names that you hear, Dan, often associated with the shooter, aside from Oswald, who was, as he said himself, a patsy, you hear the name Roscoe White Sr. You hear the name Jesse, you hear the name Jesse Smith, Jesse Roy Smith. You hear that name a lot come up. In fact, I just watched a documentary, about 2.5 hour documentary called From the Oval Office to Dealey Plaza, and it chronicles the Kennedy assassination. The interesting thing, and I want to know how they got a hold of this, but they got a piece of audio from a conversation, and it's been verified and documented. And yes, I went online to check it, and it does exist, and it's real. And the FBI, in fact, acknowledges this audio of a group of Italian businessmen, let's say, sitting around discussing how to eliminate their problem. Their problem being one John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And one of the people whose name comes up frequently in the assassination because they hated each other is a name you've already mentioned, Allen Dulles, who was head of the CIA at the time. You had Dulles as head of the CIA, Hoover, with an ironclad grip on the FBI. These two guys were asshole buddies. They were like frickin' frack. Where you had one, you had the other.
And the rule of law didn't apply to either one of them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's why we saw excesses both in the FBI and in the CIA, in those agencies that shared an important function. The FBI was responsible for all domestic intelligence operations, and the CIA was responsible for everything outward, all international intelligence operations. But those two things were not supposed to cross, and the CIA continued to have domestic operations in this country. And so the picture I think that we have of the separation of the FBI and the CIA is somewhat distorted at best, which plays a role in a lot of different things, not only in the investigation of the Kennedy assassination, but in those power brokers who existed behind the scenes who had interests that were never fully disclosed.
Dan, you brought up an interesting point. Up till around 1962, 63, FBI and CIA were like hand in glove. They worked with each other. They cross-referenced cases. They often worked together on cases. When did the I'm going to call it like it is. When did the love affair end between the FBI and CIA, and why even to this day is there still this glaring animosity between these two agencies, both police agencies, by the way?
I think that's a myth, Angelo.
Really?
I think that's a tremendous myth, and it's been fed by a number of different sources. I don't think.
Can I ask you a question, Dan? Are they feeding the myth?
I think that has been probably the case. But you got to remember the CIA and the FBI work together in many ways. I can cite you an example. I was working on an investigation back in Indiana back in the 1980s that involved raising political cash by ripping off the federal guaranteed student loan program.
Oh, Jesus.
And this scheme was run through a vocational school and a set of vocational schools. And the money that was skimmed off the top went into political coffers. And so
there's a shocker.
And in the course of my investigation, a guy showed up on my doorstep offering to assist with some source work. And he turned out to have very close ties to the Central Intelligence Agency. And then I discovered that he was also an undercover agent for the FBI. In addition to assisting me with ideas on how to find information I was looking for, including secret doors in the Department of Education where appropriate documents to their interest had been stacked up in a file room for my benefit. I began to realize that this is something that exists in a lot of different places. It certainly existed in Dallas. And one of the things I talk about in my recent book is the fact that a small storefront bank worked as non-official cover for Central Intelligence Agency people involved in intelligence who were doing things other than bank work. They were doing
absolutely
gathering and assisting. So the whole idea that, and this goes back also to this supposed rift in not being able to prevent the attack on the World Trade Center, the idea that they were so jealous of information that they wouldn't share information with each other, I find very difficult to believe.
We know historically, Dan, that Building 7, just because you mentioned the World Trade Center, I have kind of a vested interest in that because I am one of the very few people who have an actual copy of the missile hitting the Pentagon, and I have that, and I showed it on the air.
Yes.
Again, another cease and desist. Go fuck yourself. I will not cease and I will not desist. This is my job. But here is the point with regard to Building 7. It was rumored and then proven to be factual that FBI and CIA both had offices in that building, as did a large gold and silver company, I don't know, for lack of whatever word. I don't know if they called gold and silver brokers, or whatever you want to call them, but they had an office in that building as well. Why not just come clean? Isn't there? I've always been of the mindset that there's far less interest in full disclosure than if you smoke and mirrors and cloak and dagger. People will always question cloak and dagger, but nobody's ever going to question what they see in front of them. Never. And you know that to be true.
Yeah.
Why not just come clean and say, oh yeah, that's the FBI, that's the CIA, that's the National Program Office, that's the National Reconnaissance Office, that's this and that's that, and everybody's kumbaya, everybody's happy, right?
Well, I think there's always a fear that if you expose the structure that, say, controls a lot of what we believe about culture and media, et cetera, if you expose that infrastructure, people cease to believe in what they're being told. So,
can I tell you something, though? Honestly, and it's going to sound like a cop-out, people don't give a shit. Here's what people care about. Am I going to have enough to pay my electric and my phone? That's what people care. Nobody gives a rat shit ass, about anything. They don't care about that. Dan, nobody cares, man. You know it, and I know it. They don't give a shit.
I don't know, Angela, if I'd agree that it's nobody cares. I think people have lost heart in their ability to know what's true or not in a lot of different
circumstances. Tell, and they want it that way. Don't you understand, brother? You know that they want it that way. They don't want you to know what's real and what's not. Because if you know what's real, you can make an informed decision.
Yeah.
They don't want you to do that.
Well, no, I agree with you from that perspective, that there are interests out there that don't want us to know what's real. And
if you don't believe that, look at every political ad on television right now.
Yeah.
And we see blatant distortions of what is and what isn't. We can't determine for ourselves often what is the fact and what isn't. So we get lost somewhere in the middle, I think, and don't know what to believe, and so we don't believe anything. But I do know this. I do know this about what I've seen in my many years of working the streets and talking to sources and talking to people every day of my life. People want to hear a good story. They want to know. And if you know, they want to hear what you know. And if you can tell them truthfully what you know, and you can back it up with facts or documents or whatever else, they get pretty interested in that. But in the general sense, when people turn on TV and they watch the continuous stream of opinion and idea and polarization back and forth, how do you find your way through that? It makes you want to just turn it off.
We have I love Willard. He's great. Let me bring this up here. It's a Mad Dog. Have you ever heard of David Ortiz reverse audio? Yes, this one I know about. After JFK killing, when LBJ went to Capitol Hill, on reverse audio, you hear LBJ admit that they knocked Kennedy. They knocked off Kennedy and planted fake gun. And yes, and I do know that. Are you familiar with that name, David Ortiz?
I am not. I'm not.
Oh.
You're not. Okay. Dallas Police Department. Okay, here this says YouTube. YouTube. There is a photo of Dallas Police Department building, and where Oswald shot Kennedy, one of the cops had two guns in his hand. Plus, didn't Walter Cronkite first? I don't know what that means, Willard. I don't know what you're trying to say there, so I'm not even going to go further with it. Point is, yeah, it wasn't a clear cut and dry case of the president got shot and they got the bad guy. That wasn't happening.
Yeah. One thing I think is interesting, Angelo, is that if you were going to do an omnibus investigative type story on the Kennedy assassination today, to take a look at all of the evidence that exists and all of the various lines and run down through them, I think it would be really interesting to try to understand what Jack Ruby's role was in killing Oswald, because I think at that point in the story,
that's the linchpin right there. That's the linchpin.
There is much more to know, and there is a distinct lack of curiosity about that. Earl Warren went to visit Ruby in the Dallas County Jail, and Robert Story, the man I was mentioning earlier, who was so tied to the creation of the CIA, was with him when they went to Ruby, and there were definite ties between Ruby and the Chicago organized crime. There were definite ties between
Ruby my God, absolutely,
and Giancana. So when you get into that seamier side of American history and you work those avenues of investigation and you take a look at those associations, I think there you're going to find more information about the roots and causes of Kennedy.
We in fact we did the deep dive on that one. This is our Amelia. This is our 7th investigation into John Kennedy.
Yeah, and
our 7th.
Tomorrow will be 8th and 9th. Tomorrow.
I showed pictures that got me in trouble. I played audio that got me in trouble. I showed the shooter that got me in big trouble. I showed the Orville Nix film, completely cleaned up with no break, no vibration, steadied. And we isolated on that film. We isolated Amelia. Tell me if I'm lying. We isolated the kill shot.
Yes, you did.
I showed it on the air.
Yes.
We have done so many deep dives in this, and just when you think you've got some clarity, here comes another one, and there's another one. Now there's something that it was brought to my attention that the president's limousine was dented on his side.
Wow.
Right. Do you know about that?
No.
Yeah. This guy that's coming on tomorrow night, Skip G, and I don't even know his real name, but that's the name he gave me. He will be here tomorrow night, and I want to ask him about the dented limo. What happened there? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this guy's got some serious info, serious stuff. Makes my stuff look like baby pablum. Are you kidding me? Dan Lazada will be with us tomorrow and Wednesday nights for a 3-night round table on this. You want to call this an omnibus? Yeah, you sure the hell is, brother.
There you go.
Yeah, hop on the bus and let's take a
ride. Right.
Well, we're gonna. I got to do this, Amelia. What do we got coming up?
After this
week, but what do we got coming up next week?
The 28th of October, we're gonna have a simulation theory show. Are we living in a simulation?
You know what, Dan? You might be interested in that one too. Simulation theory. Are we living in a simulation? So says Elon Musk. He believes we are.
Yeah.
You know who first came up with that? Believe it or not, it wasn't Elon.
It had to be a science fiction writer.
It was actually a video game guy, a guy that did
Video game.
video games.
Yeah.
Said he realized in putting his games together, he was creating this other world,
Uh-huh.
and he thought to himself, "Well, what if we are in
Yeah.
this other world? Talk about God and divine powers and not being in control of anything. Well, the only thing in control of a video game is one person,
Right.
the person playing the game. What if
Right.
we are just wheels in the cogs in the wheels over here?
Oh
That'd be
yeah.
havoc with free will, wouldn't it?
Well, it would shoot free will right out the shitter, brother. Let me tell you.
And then the 29th, we're going to revisit Hidden in Plain Sight because we had somebody that they wanted us to
Yeah.
revisit that. So we had
Hidden in Plain Sight. We have done 2 shows on hiding in plain sight.
yes.
And again, I even mentioned it tonight. If you hide things in plain sight, nobody gives a shit.
Nope.
Right.
I'll give you a perfect example. Perfect example. Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore contains more secrets than the National Archives, the Pentagon files. That you want to know what they got there? They got a cavern
Yes.
at Mount Rushmore, right behind Abraham Lincoln's head. It's open. It's wide open. You can walk in. But they have documents there that would blow your mind if I told you what they had. Like the original Declaration of Independence. It's not in Washington.
No.
No. It's in North Dakota or South Dakota, wherever the fuck, Mount Rushmore is. One of them Dakotas, South
right. One
Dakota,
of them
right?
Dakotas, right?
Yeah. Around there, couple hours from Deadwood. I know that's somewhere
And
around
on
Deadwood.
October 30th, we're going to have horror authors Tamara Thorne and Alistair Cross joining us a day before Halloween.
Perfect timing for Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Good people. Tamara and Alistair, good people. My favorite author though is Dan Lazader because he writes the good shit. He writes the stuff
he writes the truth.
Can't make this stuff up, brother.
You can't. You can't make it up.
Nope. I always tell people truth is far stranger than you could ever write fiction.
I can testify to that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, brother. I love having you here.
Well,
Amelia.
Yes.
It's that time to say goodnight. Now, this is going to be interesting because we're going to do this outro. We're trying a new technology here, folks, so just bear with me.
Yeah.
If I fuck up, just laugh at me and go, he did it again. We have this new technology. I have to say, well, good night, folks, and take care. And Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll see you tomorrow night. God bless. And Dan Lazader will be with us. As will Pain in the Arse over here. And night number 2 with Skip G. And he will enlighten and inform us on what really happened to JFK. Good night, folks. We'll see you tomorrow night. Bye-bye.